Could have a look at that. This one, it's slightly going up. I think maybe if it was like this. Stick coffee here. And yeah, that's quite nice. Straight in front. It's a little bit of a weird angle. The only thing I don't like as well is the lighting. Maybe it's too much, which is why it's going a bit out. Yeah, it looks clearer. Let's have a look at that. It's kind of like, this is the kind of modern, socially acceptable form of schizophrenia, isn't it? It's quite weird, really. No one ever says this, but I'm literally sitting in a room. I mean, it's a beautiful day outside, and I'm sitting in here with half the shutters down because the light's too harsh. And I'm talking to a fucking camera. I'm talking to a lens. And I'm talking to you in the past, essentially. Unless I ever do this live, I'm always talking to you in the past. For me. And I'm not... It's quite an odd thought, really. It's a bit quantum-esque. In a kind of very minimal sense. Anyway, today... I want to talk about Blindness. Which is a José Saramago novel. He's a Portuguese writer born in 1922, I believe. So 4 years after the First World War. I don't really like talking too much about the authors because I think people nowadays people seem to connect the man with the art, where I think it should always be the opposite. I don't really give a fuck if the guy was a complete prick in his life. If he created brilliant art, then I don't see what else can really, what else you can really do. And to be an artist in this world is very hard. And I think a lot of the time, everyone else is against you. And no one really wants to see you succeed. I've been reading quite a lot of Robert Greene stuff. If you ever heard of the 33 Strategies of War, the 50 Laws of Power, and the one I'm on at the moment, the audiobook, which they're all really good, but the 50 Laws of Power, the narrator in that is fucking fantastic. He's got one of those voices, it sounds like it belongs to kind of a noir film. It's really gritty, and he says, "So the sucker," and all this kind of stuff. It's like listening to a, 20-hour movie trailer where some guy's just telling you how to be as dark and immoral as possible to get ahead in life. It's fucking brilliant. Why did I mention that? I'm sure there was a reason. I don't know. Maybe I'll watch it and then be annoyed that I didn't get the correlation between what I was saying. Oh yeah, about the art and the artist. Something like that. Yeah, I don't really see why, but I'll mention a few bits and bobs because people like that. He was from Portugal, and he was an atheist, so yeah, fuck yeah. Shout out to the atheists. We don't get enough of that. I'm an atheist as well, overall. Though again, labels kind of annoy me, and I was listening to 12 Rules for Life, I'll admit it. I'm not really a Peterson fan, but I find his views and his analysis of stuff very interesting, and I think he raises a lot of important questions. Whether that makes me right-wing or not, I don't know, but I still think a lot of his stuff, I love the stuff about the shadow, and I never really realised so much that the novel I'm working on at the moment, I finished it now actually. When I say working, I'm doing all the bullshit marketing side of it, and it's dull as hell. But yeah, the Union shadow, it's fascinating. I think it's very true, and yeah, it might not be proved in the scientific sense, but I don't really see what can be proved in a psychological sense until it is literally a neurological impulse or programming that makes people do what they do. And yeah, in Fubar, there is a kind of Union shadow thing going on with it, where the guy is Eric Archer's the main protagonist, and he's not really plotting a revenge kind of thing, but part of him is. So there's a kind of split, and the more he kind of denies what he's capable of, the more it starts coming out, you know. And I was delighted to find videos on that, because I kind of thought that must have been a theory or something, but I never really realised it, and yeah, that's what it ended up being. Anyway, I'm digressing a little bit, so let's get on to Blindness. I think it's worth mentioning, and it should be in an introduction. I know you're not really supposed to read introductions before you read the actual novel. I don't know whether you know that. I don't know why that is either, because it seems a bit fucking retarded to say don't read the introduction before you read the novel. But it does make sense in a weird way, but they should probably put it as like an afterword introduction or something like that, or you know, because if it's going to give away plot points, obviously you don't want to read it. But also, I don't really see why you wouldn't want to read it, because it's kind of, I mean, sometimes, yeah, you just want to get straight into it, but other times you don't. But obviously, yeah, you should read it, the book, first. And this one doesn't have one, which I'll blame Vintage Publishing for that, because it really should, because I think it's worth noting that the original Portuguese title, I can't say it, but I'll embarrass myself. It's Ensayo sobre a ceguera, or ceguera, which translates as an essay in blindness, which I think actually gives a much better clue as to the nature of the novel. I haven't watched the film, but I did read a few reviews in preparation for this. You don't think I'm doing this, you know, off my fucking top of the head, you know? But yeah, in the reviews of that, it's like people moaning about stuff that is completely insignificant to the plot, i.e., why are these people blind? It doesn't even explain why he goes blind, or why they all go blind. It just happens, and then this happens, and then But whereas if you know it's an essay on blindness, then you can it gives you a hint to the allegorical nature of the piece, which it pretty much is. I mean, it's an allegory, really. It's quite similar to like Animal Farm by Orwell and Lord of the Flies. Although the comparisons to Lord of the Flies I felt were a bit misleading, perhaps, because yeah, all of those three are all the three mentioned so far are allegories, but I actually think this is closer to Animal Farm than Lord of the Flies. But anyway, that's just an opinion. I suppose the only thing I can see that's similar are the atrocities that are within the novel. So I'll start by a kind of brief summary. If you haven't read it, I probably will spoil it for you, but I read a kind of study I skim read it. It's one of those ones, you know, I looked at the title and then read a couple of paragraphs and then was like, yeah, I've read it, I know, I understand. I didn't read it in detail, which is basically what we do now. But inside the study, it basically said that even if you do know what's going to happen, or where the story goes to, and how, or even how it concludes, it doesn't really spoil it, because if you are interested in watching it, the actual thing that will keep you captivated is the progression. You know, it's the fucking story, that why it leads to certain things that it does, which is completely true. Like, I've had people spoil stuff, and you know, I mean, it doesn't work in the case of, say, the film The Sixth Sense, where The Sixth Sense, fucking hell, I can't say that. Moving on. Whereas, yeah, the twist is kind of the whole story, and without the twist, the film kind of falls down. I mean, I have watched it a couple of times, and it is interesting to see it, you know, once you know what you know. But, you know, when the twist is the kind of whole concept, as it were, it kind of demeans the rest of the story, for me anyway. Anyway, yeah, Blindness. How it starts brilliantly because it's very metaphorical in its way. And the whole thing is kind of metaphorical for human nature, really, and the atrocities we commit. You know, if you really look at history, we're so repetitive in our politics and the way we react to things. And if there's a time of prosperity, you can bet your ass there's going to be fucking chaos just around the corner. Basically, you can go back to Rome, Greece, like any era. And in Blindness, basically how it starts is one guy is sitting in traffic one day, and he suddenly goes blind. But you know, and the blindness itself is a kind of white thing. So the eyes still look the same, but within the retinas, it's kind of it's like a white kind of milky sheen where you can't see fucking anything. So yeah, this guy starts going ballistic. As I imagine you would. I mean, it's one of those things. If you aren't blind or deaf, it's kind of one of those fears that gets in. One of mine was always losing a limb, or you know, having something happen where something goes gangrene and you need to cut it off, and it's like, ugh, kind of gives you that shivery feeling, you know. And going blind, to suddenly go blind as well. Because if it's progressive, at least you know what's happening. But to suddenly just snap, you're blind. Anyway, this guy goes blind and he's in the middle of a traffic jam, which actually serves as it's a perfect beginning to it, because it really represents, if you think about it in a kind of bird's eye view kind of thing, and how society all functions, the one guy going blind within the traffic jam really represents, in a metaphorical sense, the machine that keeps it going. And if one cog falls out of that machine, then you can bet your ass that all the cards are going to flop or fall down. And in the progressive stages, and that's exactly what happens, really. So the dude goes blind, and he's running around having a hissy fit, basically, and someone offers him help eventually, and he gets him back to his house to try and call an ophthalmologist. I think I'm pronouncing that right, but I'll say eye doctor just in case I'm making an ass of myself. I think it's an ophthalmologist. So basically, the guy who was doing a good deed turned out to just be a car thief, and he ended up just stealing his car after. I think he gives him a ride home. It was a couple of months ago I read it. And anyway, as the series events go, a group of people that end up becoming a kind of family in a way, they all end up in quarantine and that's the eye doctor, his wife, who doesn't go blind. She actually keeps her sight, but she lies about it in order to stay close to her husband. None of the characters have names, so if they sound a bit similar at times, that's just part of the novel, which I really like. I mean, if you just start writing, quite a lot of the professionals will tell you that you need to have a location and you need to make sure that the obviousness of where you are is clear, and that's fine, but I don't think that applies to a lot of stories. I don't think it matters. I mean, I am saying this from a biased point of view because I hardly ever focus on the actual cities or countries that I'm in. I think it's obvious that it is in somewhere in England, most likely in the south. So yeah, that's me. But I don't know whether, for me, really, they could be anywhere. So any urban shithole, basically, is where my stuff starts up. You can hear banging. I don't know where that's coming from, but it's annoying. I might have to see if that's wind. Un momento. Yeah, that was my door of my balcony. No one ever tells you, when you look in brochures, you can't ever see wind. That's one of the... Not that I looked at a brochure before I moved to Spain, but it gets fucking windy here. So all the characters kind of get ironic names at times. Like there's one, like the boy with the squint, because in his, seeing life, he had a squint, but now that he's blind, it seems almost irreverent to say it. It's quite funny. It's got a lot of kind of really sarcastic, kind of caustic humour in it at times. And yeah, there's the car thief I can't remember. There's a prostitute in it. I can't remember what her name is, or what her appellation is. But none of them have proper names. So once there's a group of them, they send them off to some outskirts place. I think it was some kind of hospital or possibly an asylum. I think it was an asylum. And then so they get sent into quarantine in this place. And then the army comes in to guard the whole place. So then you get the kind of us versus them dynamic. And I think what Saramago was really doing was comparing the kind of mentality that went on during the Second World War, or any war, but particularly the Second World War, and all the atrocities that took place. Anyway, the soldiers obviously are quite scared, as anyone would be, because if they're all just suddenly going blind and no one really knows why, then yeah, obviously you're going to be pretty terrified that it's going to be you next. So basically they deliver them food, but they make them come out to get it. So all these blind people are forced to kind of just get on with it and live inside this place without any knowledge of where anything is, and they have to try and find, and they're fucking bumping into stuff, and it's not a horror novel, but it is horrific, and it gets progressively horrific as it goes on, and it is another commentary, a lot like the kind of concentration camps during Second World War do get a kind of parallel view in a sense, because they are, even though they're not being forced to do labour or anything like that, they are kind of treated like scum. There's a real like post-apocalyptic kind of rhythm going on to it that, yeah, it makes you really, it's a really thought-provoking novel, I think, and there were complaints in it about the kind of, the nature of it being very obvious of the metaphor, that we are blind to our behaviour and things like that, and maybe that's a fair enough kind of criticism, but I still think it's something worth noting. I read a quote once that, we have to tell the same stories over and over again because people simply don't listen, and I think that's probably very true. And I think José Saramago did a fantastic job with this. It really is a novel that sticks with you as well afterwards. The only other one one final thing, is what I really liked about it is the way it's written. So, if you can see this, then you might notice that there's no punctuation. The dialogue tags are not separated. And apparently, when I first read it, I thought it was a kind of genius technique, because what it kind of does, although it's a little bit challenging to get into, it really kind of puts you in a position where you don't know who's talking at times, because a lot of instead of having kind of full stops to have regular sentences, commas are in the place a lot of the time, and the only time you can really tell when someone's talking is when it's when a word or a letter is capitalized, and that's when you get the sense of like, okay, someone else is talking here, and someone else, and it's tricky at the beginning to get into it, but at the same time it kind of renders you blind to who is talking or who's doing what, and it kind of puts you in this kind of thing of like, where am I? I assumed it was unique to this book, but it's not. It's just a technique he uses, because he does it all over the place in this one as well, and which is a bit disappointing, I suppose, but I don't think it takes anything away from Blindness. It's just it's not as unique as I thought it was, which is a bit of a shame, but never mind, I suppose. The double, I haven't actually got that into. You might notice I've got the bookmark there, but I think I'm about 100 pages in. It's just very slow, I've found so far. Anyway, yeah, that's it. Blindness. I haven't got much else to say about it. It's one of those books that really stays with you. It's very thought-provoking, beautifully written, like majestic at times, I'd say. Really worth getting your teeth into, because yeah, it might not give you a load of backstory and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it doesn't really give you any, I don't think, apart from a few kind of tidbits from various characters, but it's more about the situation they're in and how humanity would react to it, whilst also being a kind of mirror to how we've been in the past and how we've dealt with things that have got out of control and the kind of us versus them mentality. And yeah, the longer we stay blind to how we behave, the scarier and the worse things are going to get. And I've completely ruined the story for you if you haven't read it. But I did warn you, so it's your fault.